Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about What If Deku Was Trapped in Despair Part 1. If you guys enjoy this What If and want to see Part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story MotivationIsDead from 𝗧𝗵𝗲. So let's start the video. Are you sure you will be alright? Sonia asks worriedly. The connection isn't the best. The sound slightly distorted and the screen periodically glitching. So it's almost impressive that Sonia's voice still manages to come through sounding melodic. Even with a poor quality and jerky imagery, Hajime can still make out her furrowed eyebrows and soft frown as she chews on her bottom lip, the skin already red from irritation. That habit had only started about 2 months ago, back when the Future Foundation had started calling on them for missions. Hajime regrets that a little. We'll be fine, Hajime reassures her for the 3rd time. Sonia smiles valiantly at his attempt. She lets out a soft sigh and raises a hand to brush a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I know, she assures with what Hajime has mentally dubbed as her princess smile. A smile that's there for the show of it, rather than any true measure of how she's feeling. I just like to hear you say it. It's more reassuring than hearing it from myself. Understandable, Hajime says wryly, turning slightly in his chair to look back at his classmates, playing what looks to be an extreme version of Go Fish, complete with death threats. Komaeda's winning, of course, his most unassuming smile firmly in place, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄 looking only a couple moments away from flipping the table as he spits curses at his hand of cards. Gundam is muttering something about dark magic, eyeing Komaeda warily from behind his scarf. Pico and the imposter share an exasperated look over everyone's heads. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄 throws his cards at Komaeda in disgust. The cards stop short of actually reaching him and flutter down onto the table. Are you fucking cheating? 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄 demands. How the hell do you keep winning? Komaeda gives his most irritatingly mild smile. Luck. Hajime coughs to hide his laugh. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄 crosses his arms. No, you know what? This isn't luck. This is fucking bullshit. There has likely never been a more accurate description of Komaeda's ultimate talent. And Hajime's ultimate talent is literally every talent in existence. He's the reigning king of bullshit at this point. In retrospect, Komaeda's reaction to the Neo World program makes a lot more sense. Mysteriously kidnapped and transported to a tropical island paradise by a talking rabbit. A bit unusual, but probably barely even a blip on Komaeda's radar. A life and death killing game. Just another Tuesday in the life of Nagito Komaeda. Luck Edition. On Komaeda's left, Gundam gives Komaeda a suspicious look. Indeed, Gundam intones gravely into his scarf. What dark force do you command to possess such power? I couldn't possibly begin to guess, Komaeda says with a light laugh and close-eyed smile. He raises his hands in surrender, his metal arm making a whirring noise at the movement. If Hajime ignores everything he knows about him, Komaeda can easily be mistaken as harmless. It's decidedly unsettling. I don't know why you expected this to end any differently, the imposter, still dressed as Tagami, tells 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄 wryly as Pico pats 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄's shoulder comfortingly. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄 definitely does not pout. They're all hopeless, Hajime concludes fondly. Sonia must have either gotten a glimpse of the chaos happening behind him, or read the expression on his face too well, because she giggles, bringing his attention back to the screen. Her smile is easier now, looser and realer for it. Hajime smiles back, shrugging. Have you talked to Kazuichi's group? Sonia asks. Hajime leans back in his seat. They're fine. Kazuichi's confident everything will go right. To be honest, I'm more worried about Mikan being stuck with all those big personalities. A team with Ibuki, Akane, and Nekomaru with Mikan sounded like a disaster in Hajime's opinion. But the 3 of them were powerhouses, albeit lacking in any form of subtlety. Which was why they were guarding Mikan and Kazuichi, whose ultimate skills were too useful to be left unprotected in enemy territory. Sonya laughs uneasily at that, some measure of humor still present as she says, "We'll have to apologize to her later." 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 hums in agreement. "You'll look after everything back home?" 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 asks because Sonya does better when she has a mission to keep her from feeling helpless. "Of course," Sonya answers firmly, smiling so much 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 has to resist the urge to squint at the brightness of it. "And you all shall be careful, right?" "Of course," 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 echoes back, and very carefully doesn't look at the burgundy scarf around her neck straight from Gundam's closet, if 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 isn't wrong. He rarely is anymore. He already knows better than anyone what's at stake. Sonya's beaming smile softens and, "God," comes Seonji's voice from over the video feed. "I'm going to puke. Are you two losers ever going to be done talking?" Maharu is already scolding Seonji off camera as Sonya delicately raises a hand to hide her small grin, and 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 lets out a sigh. From behind him, there's the soft sound of footsteps that 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 knows are inaudible to everyone else. Komaeda makes so little noise, he's like a ghost most of the time. 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 turns slightly to angle a questioning look at him. Komaeda smiles unassumingly back. "I got kicked out," he says lightly, and 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 squints at him. He can't tell if he's joking or not. Komaeda doesn't seem upset, but that doesn't really tell 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 anything at all. Unlike most people, Komaeda doesn't seem to realize he can be unhappy about something the normal way. Normal, not including Komaeda's usual coping methods of attempted murder and bomb threats. 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵's working on that. Before 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 can ask if he's okay though, Komaeda's gaze flickers to the screen. He places a hand on 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵's chair to lean forward. 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 feels hyper-aware of it. He is with most things lately. "Ah, Miss Sonya," Komaeda says with unfailing politeness, and no surprise, 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 notes. "May I ask what you're calling for?" Sonya smiles back easily. "Of course you may ask. I was just checking in before your mission." Not for the first, 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 feels a rush of gratefulness towards Sonya. Komaeda's relationship with the rest of their class is shaky at best, with 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 being forced to act as both a buffer and bridge between Komaeda and, well, everyone else. Sonya, at least, is on more stable ground with Komaeda than everyone else, even if it's only out of politeness. Sonya is by far the best blessing 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 could have asked for, really. "Well, I'm sure everything will be fine," Komaeda answers with a bright smile that still feels subdued. 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 will be with us after all. "Don't jinx it, dumbass," inserts Seonji's voice, the camera feed going blurry as Seonji physically wrangles the computer screen towards her. Komaeda's already backing down, hands raised in a placating gesture and sheepish smile firmly in place. "That wasn't my intention." The way Seonji glares at Komaeda speaks volumes. It almost looks as if she's judging his soul and finding it lacking anything remotely appealing. Which, in all honesty, is fair. "We'll be careful," 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 reiterates before Seonji can make it worse. Seonji huffs as if she knows what 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵's doing, scowling at the camera. She jabs a finger at the screen. "You idiots all better come back alive, or I'll never forgive you, ever. Thanks." 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 offers dryly, fairly certain that was Seonji's version of expressing concern. She huffs again, looking decidedly unsatisfied, even as the video feed moves away from her and back to Sonya, who looks faintly frazzled but decidedly amused. "My apologies, 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵," Sonya offers, voice high with barely contained mirth. 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 runs a hand through his short hair, offering an uptick of his lips and says, "It's fine. I know how Seonji is." 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 dutifully ignores said person's protests in the background. His watch beeps. And that's our cue. Any pleasure in Sonya's eyes dies, but her smile, however brittle, holds up. "Of course. I did not mean to keep you so long. Have a safe mission. I hope everything goes well." "Thanks," 𝗂𝐴𝐽𝐵 says, more sincerely now. "Do you want to say goodbye to anyone before I go, or?" For a moment Sonya looks sad and longing, biting her lip as she touches the scarf on her neck. But then it's gone. Her smile back in place as she says, "No, I have kept you for long enough." "Okay," 𝐎𝐽𝐽 agrees, wishing not for the first time that he wasn't hyper-aware of the pain in her smile, while lacking all the tools to fix it. The screen goes black, and the hand Komaeda had placed on the back, his chair moves away to lightly rest between 𝐎𝐽𝐽's shoulder blades. "It's time then," Komaeda says lightly, tilting his head towards where the others are sitting. 𝐎𝐽𝐽 smoothly stands up, meeting everyone's gaze head-on. "It's time." Mission start. It starts, like most things do, with a bang. Does anyone even know what this shit is supposed to do? 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫 asks grumpily, staring at the panel of buttons and the hulking machine behind them. One of the guards at 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫's feet groans, tries to roll over. 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫 kicks him in the stomach without pause. For a moment 𝐎𝐽𝐽 feels something akin to pity as he watches the remnant of despair wheeze on floor before the feeling is gone again. "We'll have to wait until Kazuichi gets here," 𝐎𝐽𝐽 offers, watching imposter Byakuya for now pick through pockets for anything of value. Komaeda watching him curiously as Pico and Gundam stand guard outside. 𝐎𝐽𝐽 had been told, in no uncertain terms, by Tagami that Komaeda wasn't allowed out of his sight. "We have enough problems without him adding to them," Tagami had said caustically, scowling at Komaeda, who'd waved cheerfully at him in response. Komaeda didn't have much in the way of self-preservation, but then he didn't really need it in the first place with how his luck worked. 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫, bless him, only nods in acceptance, and doesn't say anything about how 𝐎𝐽𝐽 could just look at the machine himself, because he knows 𝐎𝐽𝐽 is a little weird about using his ultimate talents at times. Not for the first time 𝐎𝐽𝐽 feels utterly thankful for 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫's friendship. It's something he's been experiencing a lot over the past few months. "It looks very complicated," Komaeda comments lightly, apparently having meandered over while 𝐎𝐽𝐽 had been lost in thought. "I wonder what it does." 𝐎𝐽𝐽 resists the urge to physically drag Komaeda away from the control board, if only barely. He settles for tugging lightly at his sleeve. "I don't know and I don't care," 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫 says bluntly. "But don't fucking touch it," he adds forcefully, glaring at Komaeda like he's just daring him to try. Komaeda laughs sheepishly, raising his hands in surrender, and even takes a prudent step away from the panel. "Well, I'm sure you don't have any reason to be concerned," he says brightly, but thankfully leaves the as an ultimate unsaid. Unraveling Komaeda's hero worship is a work in progress. 𝐎𝐽𝐽 is just glad that there's been any kind of progress at all considering. And of course that's about when everything goes wrong. There's a commotion outside. One of the remnants of despair pretending to be knocked out on the floor lunges at 𝐎𝐽𝐽. During the distraction, Komaeda stumbles back in surprise, catching himself on the panel and accidentally pressing some important-looking button. 𝐎𝐽𝐽 doesn't remember much of anything beyond that except for a blinding light. When 𝐎𝐽𝐽 wakes up, it's Komaeda hovering worriedly over him, and a bright blue, not a poisonous red sky behind him. It's all eerily similar to how 𝐎𝐽𝐽 woke up in the Neo World program. "Am I dead?" 𝐎𝐽𝐽 asks, nonplussed. "What the fuck?" 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫 says from somewhere in the background, unimpressed with 𝐎𝐽𝐽's apparent conclusion. Komaeda shares a concerned glance with someone 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫 out of 𝐎𝐽𝐽's view and says, "Not as far as we can tell." 𝐎𝐽𝐽 gamely sits up at the confirmation, Komaeda shuffling back a few steps to give him space, and looks around. Well, at least he's not on a beach this time. They're in some kind of closed-off area, private property, with a large structure in front of them. The building's structure isn't consistent with that of a house or mansion though. Actually, the structure almost seems kind of familiar. It's 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫, the only one here besides Komaeda, that says it first, outraged at the universe. "Is that a motherfucking school?" 𝐎𝐽𝐽's liking this less and less already. "This," 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫 declares gravely, glaring at Komaeda hard enough to kill, "is your fault." Tellingly, neither 𝐎𝐽𝐽 nor Komaeda refute that. "It could be worse," 𝐎𝐽𝐽 offers, sounding dubious despite himself. 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐻𝐼 doesn't look at all impressed by this reasoning, and Komaeda is staring whimsically off into the distance, lost in thought. Yeah, Hajime doesn't believe himself either. Where the fuck even are we? 𝗧𝗪𝗼 gripes at no one in particular, aiming a glare towards the sky. Komaeda hums thoughtfully. I have a theory about that actually. Hajime almost doesn't want to ask. Which is? Komaeda lightly claps his hands together, the sound odd with his metal hand. Well, he starts brightly. None of us know what that machine was supposed to do, but we know that the remnants of despair were trying to gather more followers and spread more despair, of course. Of course. Hajime and 𝗧𝗪𝗼 stare at Komaeda blankly. Komaeda smiles winsomely. So I'm thinking that they decided to take their recruitment measures a bit farther away from home. Like, perhaps a dimension away from ours. In plain Japanese would be great, 𝗧𝗪𝗼 says dryly. He's saying we're in another world. Or dimension. However you want to phrase it, Hajime summarizes, distantly, running that theory through his head and scrutinizing it. 𝗧𝗪𝗼 blinks. Are you fucking kidding me? He asks them, sounding more irritated at the situation than anything else. Komaeda shrugs. It fits, he offers, somewhat blandly, reminding Hajime of the tone he would take during class trials. The sky is blue, the air is clean, and the building is perfectly intact from what we can see. A stark contrast to their own decaying world. And more than that, it's not even that impossible a theory to consider when you account for Hajime's and Komaeda's combined luck. Which is perhaps the craziest part about this entire situation. What even is Hajime's life anymore? So was the Neo World program, 𝗧𝗪𝗼 points out caustically, arms crossed. Komaeda folds his arms together loosely. A good point, he says, seemingly delighted at being contradicted. Or maybe just at the interaction itself. But this is noticeably different. The Neo World program was almost too perfect in some ways. It hadn't been noticeably because nobody had ever considered that what they were experiencing wasn't real. In retrospect, though, it was obvious. Little details had often been lost in the program. It was why Komaeda had been able to prance around a tropical island in a jacket without breaking a sweat or feeling too hot. And that was while ignoring the more obvious things, like suddenly being transported to a tropical island from a classroom in the blink of an eye, or the perfect and suspiciously timed weather, or robot Nekomaru. Again, obvious in retrospect, but an impossible idea to come to in the moment. Well, Hajime says dryly, unless the world miraculously recovered in the time we were unconscious, then this is the best theory we have. Though I guess time travel is an option too. 𝗧𝗪𝗼 makes a face. But seriously? Another world? That's what we're going with? He asks incredulously. Hajime can't believe it either. Unfortunately. Well, Komaeda says idly, rocking back and forth on his heels. Now that that's decided, what should we now? That was the big question, wasn't it? Unfortunately, in next second, they were suddenly surrounded, so the question would have to wait. Tea? The tiny, furry creature in front of him asks jovially. Hajime's having flashbacks to Monokuma. Judging by Komaeda's rapid blinking and 𝗧𝗪𝗼's strained expression, Hajime isn't the only one either. Hajime keeps his expression purposefully flat. Tea is fine. And if it's poisoned, even better. At least, then he'll be put out of his misery. The two adults that had dumped them into the office, they're currently sitting and stand behind the mysterious creature. One of them is buff enough to give Nekomaru a run for his money, with a smile permanently frozen onto his face, and wearing spandex. Hajime can hear Tigami's scathing commentary at the clothing choice across time and space. The other one is practically a shadow in comparison, dressed in all black and practically dead on his feet. 𝗧𝗪𝗼 scowls at the creature suspiciously, but it seems unfazed as it pours out 4 cups of tea. The tiny creature mouse claps its paws together, smiling brightly at them once the tea is passed out. Hajime downs his tea with a blank face and waits. Nope, still alive. Which means he actually has to deal with all this. Damn it. I'm 𝗧𝗪𝗂, the creature says chirpily. Am I a mouse? Am I a bear? But more importantly, I'm the principal of you. High school. Oh, God, it is a Monokuma situation all over again, Hajime thinks, hiding his horrified expression behind his teacup. And I'd like to ask you how you managed to get past our security undetected and onto school grounds. Komaeda smiles winningly back at 𝗧𝗪𝗂 because nothing phases him. It's a pleasure to meet you, he offers sincerely, and Hajime genuinely wonders how he functions. But I'm afraid we have no idea. We just happened to wake up there. Is that so? The creature asks lightly, and Hajime genuinely can't tell if he believes them or not, even as the darker adult glowers at them. It's like trying to figure out Komaeda all over again. That's a horrifying thought. One Nagito Komaeda is already too much for any world, let alone two in the same one. You said we're in high school? Komaeda asks curiously, his tone just the right balance between light and inquisitive. 𝗧𝗪𝗂 peers at them curiously, like they're nifty little puzzles for him to solve. Indeed. Komaeda lets out an absent-minded hum. I've never heard of it before. You're kidding, right? The darkly dressed adult says, landing somewhere between dismissive, condescending, and otherworldly tired. It's known as the best hero school worldwide. There's no way you haven't heard of it. Hajime, Komaeda, and Fuyuhiko exchange glances. That's another point towards dimensional travel. Hero school? Hajime finally asks when no else does, because Fuyuhiko is still being stubbornly silent and Komaeda is gently blowing on his hot tea. Dark and brooding stares at them disbelievingly, even as 𝗧𝗪𝗂 helpfully pipes up with, a school for training upcoming heroes. Fuyuhiko looks like he's given up on life. And that's normal? He says faintly, incredulously. As someone from a crime family, the whole idea probably sounds ridiculous and vaguely insulting. Hajime supposes that Hope's Peak had followed a similar line of thinking though. Training students in their chosen talent to help better the world, or something. And look how that had turned out. Now both adults even smiles is staring at them like they think they're either joking, lying, or brain damaged. Only 𝗧𝗪𝗂 seems unfazed, smiling at them just as cheerfully as before. How did you get here again? 𝗧𝗪𝗂 asks as disarmingly as possible. A machinery accident, Hajime says, straight-faced. Fuyuhiko chokes on the tea. He finally stopped eyeing suspiciously. Komaeda graciously passes him some napkins and doesn't seem to notice the looks given to his metal arm. It's a toss-up on whether or not Komaeda is actually oblivious or just expertly ignoring it though. Komaeda helpfully fills the other people in the room in before they decide to send them all to a mental hospital. Although maybe that wouldn't be remiss in Komaeda's case. We believe we're from another dimension and have accidentally ended up in your world. Fuyuhiko groans loudly, sinking further into the couch, like just hearing the words physically pains him. The adults are still staring at them like they're crazy. Hajime can't really blame them. 𝗧𝗪𝗂 serenely takes another sip of tea. That's quite the interesting story, he offers blithely. Smiles makes a choking noise. I think I need to make a call, he says weakly, edging towards the door. Yes, you do that, 𝗧𝗪𝗂 says pleasantly before turning back to them. In the meantime, would you like some more tea while we wait? Hajime didn't sign up for this. He wants a refund. This is bullshit, Fuyuhiko says, glaring at the changing room door like the people on the other side of it will spontaneously combust under its power. Hajime wishes him luck in the endeavor. Komaeda pauses in buttoning up his new uniform to give Fuyuhiko a puzzled look. Is it? I think it's a rather generous deal so far. They're providing us with food and housing after all. Attending their hero school seems like a small price to pay in exchange. The thing about Komaeda is that it's easy to forget that there's actually a brain somewhere in there. Komaeda always tends to be more clever than he lets on with his unassuming smile, mild-mannered attitude, and occasional bouts of craziness covering up the fact he's 10 steps ahead of everyone else, questionable thought process aside. Fuyuhiko clearly remembers this at the same time Hajime does based on the sour look on his face. It's stupid, he says anyway, sounding more petulant than pissed off now. We're not even high school students anymore. We could actually be doing something. We could be looking for them to see if they're here, or finding some way back. Hajime sighs because he doesn't really want to be doing this either, but they have more resources than we do, and they actually know the city. They have a better chance of finding them, or a way back, than we do at this point. Fuyuhiko crosses his arms to scowl at the wall as Komaeda finishes with his tie, Hajime reaching out automatically to straighten it to unnecessary perfection. His robot arm isn't the best with fine motor skills yet. Hajime is still working out some things. Komaeda beams at him in thanks. There's still a few days before the school year starts, but, predictably, the school uniform is the only kind of clothing the school kept in stock. Don't worry, Komaeda says lightly, smoothing down his shirt, placid smile firmly in place. If anyone can handle themselves, it would be those three. I'm sure they're fine. He has a point. But hero students? Fuyuhiko says with palpable disgust. There's some kind of bitter irony in training to be heroes after they've already destroyed the world. Well, a world anyway. I think it's rather fascinating, Komaeda says airily. An entire society built around heroics. It's a ticking time bomb, Fuyuhiko interjects bluntly. Remember Hope's Peak? Komaeda's still smiling, but there's something noticeably brittle about it, and his eyes are dead. No one has a response to that. I don't trust them, Fuyuhiko finishes bluntly, glancing at the door to make it obvious who he means. It's a statement of fact more than anything else. At this point, we don't have a choice, Hajime says grimly, finally finished buttoning up his own shirt and starting on his tie. Besides, Komaeda adds, back to being disproportionately cheerful. They don't exactly trust us either. It's not like we've told them everything. Or anything really. Hajime's innermost nature is that of a criminal mastermind on the run from the international police, with him only barely trusting inanimate objects, much less people. Thanks for that, Izuru. And Monokuma. There's also some irony thrown in there too, considering that he actually is thought to be a criminal mastermind on the run from the Future Foundation by most of the world. So Hajime doesn't really tell the heroes anything, with Fuyuhiko and Komaeda following his lead. Though Hajime does make sure to offhandedly mention that there might be others who ended up in this world. After several more vague, mostly non-answers with someone that was apparently a human lie detector, because superpowers were actually a thing in this world, Nedzu has seemingly decided to leave them be for now. Hajime doesn't think for a second that it's over. Just look at it this way, Hajime says wryly. Worst comes to worst, we'll bail and win a few $1 million so that we can commission for a way back. It's a valid plan when you have two people with ultimate luck on your side. Fuyuhiko visibly considers that, sighing as he ducks his head down. Fine. We'll do that. But if they try anything, I'll handle it, Hajime says resolutely, tightening his own tie. And that's the end of that. Hajime hasn't let them down before, and he's not starting now. Being the ultimate has to be good for something. Recover Girl is a short woman that apparently acts as the school nurse. It should also be noted that Hajime doesn't do hospitals or anything remotely resembling them. Days of unending testing and cutting into his flesh needles and smiling scientist doctors. Prodding him he couldn't breathe, couldn't remember his own name, bored, this world is so boring. You're Izuru Kamikura. I'm not going in there, Hajime reiterates stonily, unmoved. Recovery Girl frowns severely up at him. I need to give all of you a checkup. Her gaze darts specifically to Komaeda and his arm. Which, okay, yeah, Hajime gets why they're here. He's still not going in. He said he didn't want to, Fuyuhiko growls, positioning himself just slightly in front of Hajime defensively. It's a nice gesture. Dark and brooding 𝐎𝐬𝐽 Aizawa apparently scowls at them, Fuyuhiko scowling back more often than not. Hajime kind of expects them to try and kill each other before the day is over. Komaeda, ever the peacemaker when he isn't actively raining destruction down on their heads, gives Recovery Girl his sweetest smile and says diplomatically, "Would you be open to doing that out here?" He motions to the hallway. "As opposed to the infirmary? My friend has had a bad experience with doctors and hospitals, you see." That's certainly one way of putting it. It also neatly sidesteps Komaeda's own discomfort with hospitals. Not because Komaeda's trying to actively hide it, but because his own discomfort genuinely doesn't factor in for him. Hajime's going to need to work on that. Recovery Girl's frown softens in the face of Komaeda's earnest expression and reasoning. As always, Komaeda has people right where he wants them to be. It's a little baffling considering how socially inept he can be at times. "I understand, dear," she says and pats Hajime's leg comfortingly. "I'll go get some things," Recovery Girl continues as she hobbles back into the infirmary. "You boys wait here. The checkups go mostly as expected barring a few hiccups." "How did you lose an arm?" Aizawa asks bluntly. Recovery Girl smacks his arm with her clipboard at the lack of tact. Hajime covers Komaeda's mouth with his hand before he can answer. "Lest the words 'I cut it off' ever be spoken aloud. It was an accident," Hajime says instead, making an effort to keep his face straight. Aizawa squints at them dubiously, gaze lingering on where Hajime's hand is keeping Komaeda from answering. "An accident," he repeats flatly. "It was very tragic," Komaeda adds when Hajime finally releases him, giving his most air-headed smile. Aizawa squints harder. "And how did you lose an eye?" Recovery Girl asks, this time with considerably more tact and sympathy. "Not that it helps much." "None of your fucking business," Fuyuhiko deadpans. "Though drawing blood turns out to be interesting." "Nope," Hajime says immediately. "Not happening. No needles. It's just so I can take some blood. It'll be perfectly harmless," Recovery Girl says patiently, but there's something else in her gaze now. Knowing. Understanding, maybe. Hajime would have been able to read it if panic wasn't chilling every inch of his body and making it painful to breathe. "No needles," Hajime repeats, squeezing Komaeda's hand hard enough for it to be painful, but Komaeda only gently squeezes back. Recovery Girl drops it. "It's pink," Recovery Girl says blankly, staring at the vial of blood with what might be fascination. Considering she lives in a world where superpowers are normal, Hajime feels like this shouldn't be quite so surprising. Komaeda peers dubiously at them. "Are you sure? It looks red to me." "It's pink," Recovery Girl insists. Komaeda shrugs. "If you say so," he humors, sounding like he doesn't believe her at all. "Why is it pink?" Aizawa asks, staring at them like he's not quite sure what he's looking at anymore. Fuyuhiko gives the blood a dismissive once-over. "I'm pretty sure it's red," he corrects blandly. Aizawa looks like he wants to tear out his hair. And then, of course, there's Komaeda. Recovery Girl blinks rapidly at him, clipboard lowering. "I'm sorry, what was that, dear?" Komaeda smiles whimsically. He might as well be talking about the weather for all the effect the conversation has on him. "I have stage 3 malignant lymphoma and frontotemporal lobe dementia," he informs obliviously, losing absolutely none of his cheer. Recovery Girl stares at him like she's not sure how he's alive or functioning, and she doesn't even know the half of it. Her expression reminds Hajime a little of the way Sonya reads cookbooks. Head tilted with a little bit of confusion, some interest, and a healthy dose of "oh my, what is that" added on top. Fuyuhiko, who this is new information for, stares at Komaeda like he's having an epiphany. Muttering something about how it explains his dumbass behavior and suicidal tendencies. Hajime pretends not to hear any of it, because he's nice like that. "What the fuck," Aizawa says, looking like he wants a drink. But overall it doesn't go too badly. And by that Hajime means no one dies, which is really more than he'd been hoping for. Hajim's expectations are actually through the floor. But that's okay because he likes them there. The buildings are all standing. It's not a revelation. Or, well, it shouldn't be. Except, there are buildings standing. Intact. With no obvious signs damage. There's no rubble in the street either, or broken down cars. No blood, ranging from years to days old, splattered across the walls and grounds like a bad paint job everywhere you look. No smoke covering the sky like a blanket, and the taste of ash in your mouth every time you breathe. No corpses littering the ground and the rotting smell of decay in the air. Fresh air. The sun is shining. People are chatting casually and laughing as they walk down the street. And the buildings are all intact. This is what the world is supposed to be like, Hajime reminds himself, feeling uncomfortably out of his depth. This is normal for someone that hasn't come from a post-apocalyptic world in ruins. Junko fucking Inoshima, he thinks. It feels like catchphrase at this point. Next to Hajime, Komaeda is wearing a smile that looks decidedly plastic as he toys with the edge of his sleeve. On his other side, Fuyuhiko hunches his shoulders in defensively, strung tight and reminding Hajime of nothing more than a feral cat bristling defensively. He kindly keeps this observation to himself. "Are you ready, kiddies?" Midnight asks them brightly. Midnight is a hero that could benefit from a few dozen sexual harassment seminars. Hajime thanks just about every being in the universe, including Komaeda and his disastrous luck, that Terutoru is unable to meet her. Unfortunately, they're stuck with her for this outing since Aizawa had unapologetically bailed as soon as he heard the word shopping. And probably just to get away from them too. "Why are we even here?" Fuyuhiko complains as Komaeda peers curiously at the surrounding shops. "As cute as you are in those uniforms," Midnight comments flirtatiously. "Sexual harassment," Hajime repeats forcefully, ignoring the resulting wink Midnight gives him, and prudently takes several steps away, dragging Komaeda with him. "You'll need more clothes if you're going to stay here," she finishes with unnecessary and dramatic flourish. Hajime can't argue with that. Though Fuyuhiko looks like he desperately wants to. He also looks like he wants to be anywhere, but here and Hajime has never related more to a person. "We don't have any money," Hajime addresses. Midnight waves a dismissive hand. "No need to worry about that. Nezu has it covered," she reassures. It's not reassuring at all. Hajime doesn't really want to owe the talking mouse any more than they already do. "We'll pay you back," Hajime says instead. Midnight laughs. "How polite," she coos. That's not what it is at all. But arguing with her seems like more work than it is to just leave her in her delusion. "Let's try this one," Komaeda decides brightly, pointing at a nearby clothing store. Hajime and Fuyuhiko exchange looks. There's only two options any choice Nagito Komaeda makes can be: extremely lucky or extremely unlucky. Hajime shrugs at Fuyuhiko. Komaeda is a hazard to society, but as long as he's with Hajime, then chances are that they'll all make it out alive. At least, that was the Future Foundation's logic when they paired Hajime and Komaeda together on missions. Komeda's luck makes him too valuable to kill but too dangerous to live, Tagami had said flatly. This way we can optimize his potential without needlessly endangering everyone he comes into contact with. So they go. Reluctantly. With Midnight blissfully ignorant to her potentially impending doom as she cheerfully follows Komaeda into the store. "What the hell are we even looking for?" Fuyuhiko asks distractedly with vague irritation, frowning as he shifts through clothing hangers. Nothing on that rack will have anything in his size, but Hajime's not about to tell him that. "Shirts, pants, a couple of jackets," Hajime lists, glancing down at Fuyuhiko. "No suits," he adds because he's not sure Fuyuhiko has ever dressed casually a day in his life. The hospital gown notwithstanding. Fuyuhiko grimaces like that is worst part about this whole situation. By another rack, Midnight is trying to convince Komaeda to try on something with too many frills. Komaeda is holding out though, however apologetically. Sometimes Hajime forgets that before the world went to shit, Komaeda was a functioning weight. No semi-functioning person for most of his life. "Do you want me to pick some clothes out for you?" Hajime asks wryly, running his hands over a shirt that's the same shade of green as Komaeda's 55 jacket. "I'm sure I have an ultimate fashionista stylist in me somewhere." Fuyuhiko snorts, eyeing the clothes balefully. "I think I'll manage," he says dryly. "It can't be that fucking hard." Hajime's lips quirk up helplessly in response. "If you say so." "I think I found everything I need," Komaeda announces as he drifts over, a pile of clothes in his arms, noticeably lacking anything with frills as Midnight pouts in the background. "I'm going to go check out." "Do you want me to go with?" Hajime asks. Komaeda smiles, but it has nothing to do with how he's feeling. He chuckles, eyes dark. "I'll be fine. The checkout station is only 8 feet away after all." 𝗬𝗏 scowled fiercely down at Hajime and Komaeda. 10 feet, he said abruptly. "I don't want either of you more than 10 feet apart at any given moment." "That seems a little excessive," Hajime had offered. "Did I ask you?" 10 feet, or you don't go on the mission at all," 𝗬𝗏 reiterated. "They go on the mission." "Fair enough," Hajime says now. Komaeda opens his mouth to say something and truck busts through the side of the store. There's surprisingly little screaming, even as Midnight rushes over to check on them. The citizens must be used to stuff like this in a hero society. "Are you okay?" she asks urgently, expression serious as she checks them over. For the first time, Hajime can believe her when she says she's a hero. "We're fine," Hajime offers, helping Komaeda up off the ground as Fuyuhiko swears vehemently at the pile of clothes that fell on top of him. "We got lucky." "Ha!" Komaeda gives his pile of clothes on the ground a speculative look. Hajime can see bits of rubble in his hair and some dust smeared across part of his cheek. "Do you think this means we get a discount?" Komaeda asks, eyeing the hole in the wall thoughtfully. Hajime and Fuyuhiko sigh. For the first time, Midnight looks like she might be comprehending exactly what kind people she and you, have gotten involved with. "They're missing?" Sonya repeats, voice high. To his credit, 𝗬𝗏 doesn't look any happier than her, frowning over the feed as he says, "That's what I said. It's only years of etiquette lessons that keep Sonya from breaking composure completely." "But they're not." She can't even finish the sentence. Sympathy is not a tried and true 𝗬𝗏 expression, so Sonya wouldn't go so far as to say that's the look he gives her now. But something in his harsh expression eases at her worried one. "We didn't find any bodies," 𝗬𝗏 says evenly. He's too realistic to give her false reassurances and promises. Sonya can almost appreciate that. Later, when she doesn't quite feel like she's coming apart at the seams, Sonya takes a deep breath, in and out. A trick her father had taught her when she was still nervous about the idea of public speaking. "What happened?" Sonya asks firmly, hands clenched tightly in her dress. But at least that's out of 𝗬𝗏's sight. 𝗬𝗏 shifts slightly, crossing his arms as he breathes out a deep sigh. "Some of our agents reported a bright light, at first believing it to be some kind of explosion. Upon further investigation, they could find that the building had not sustained further damage, and there was nothing resembling a flashbang found at the scene. However, Hajime Hinata, Nagito Komaeda, Fuyuhiko Kyuzuryu, Pico Pekoyama, Gundam Tanaka, and the imposter were found missing." 𝗬𝗏's tone is clinically detached, recounting facts more than anything else. "It's possible," 𝗬𝗏 adds, almost absently, as he presses a finger to side of his glasses, "that more people are missing as well if those 6 are missing." Sonya reminds herself, not dead. "Do you know what happened?" 𝗬𝗏's resulting scowl says that. "No, they don't. At this point, we can only speculate," he says bluntly. "But the remnants were working on a machine, and its purpose was unknown, which is part of what caught our attention in the first place. It's possible that this machine has something to do with their little disappearing act," 𝗬𝗏 adds. sounding like it pains him to admit to something so uncertain. 𝗧𝗏's currently examining the machine as we speak. But they're not dead, Sonia presses lightly. Togami dips his head in acknowledgement. As far as we know. Something relaxes in Sonia's chest. I also find it hard to believe, he adds wryly, that anything could kill them so easily with both Hinata and Komaeda present. If they're lucky. But then when aren't those two? And sometimes luck is the deciding factor. I understand, Sonia says, mustering a smile. However brittle it must look. I shall head over shortly. That's unnecessary, Togami says matter-of-factly. Your presence won't help anything. I'm afraid you've misunderstood, Sonia says sweetly. I am done waiting, and I will be seeing you shortly. Togami looks vaguely irritated now, mouth pressed into a thin line. It's difficult to remember sometimes that Togami's a year younger than Sonia, what with the confidence and authority he wears around himself like a cloak. Or a shield. It's more obvious now, in the tightness around his eyes and the exhaustion weighing down his shoulders. They're both leaders, but Sonia wonders why Togami seems so much stronger than her. Perhaps it's simply a matter of the difference in strength between them. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 is long gone. Burnt to the ground and torn apart by Sonia's own hands when she was in ultimate despair. She can almost taste the ashes. Very well, Togami concedes imperiously, obviously disgruntled. I'll arrange for your flight. Should I expect the rest of your merry band of idiots to follow along too? Sonia smiles and gently brushes some hair away from her eyes. It's a delicate and pretty smile. It does absolutely nothing to hide the fire burning in her eyes. I believe you should. The dorm rooms they'll be staying at turn out to only be partially built. Most of the rooms are unfinished, some entirely lacking things like walls and proper flooring. This is your room, Aizawa says, though the complete lack of energy he puts into talking makes it sound closer to a mumble. The room is sparse. There's a window on the back wall and few bedrolls placed out on the floor for them. But the roof is still attached, and there's no blood or corpses that they have to share the room with. So it's already leagues better than most other places that they've hunkered down in. We're working on the other rooms, Aizawa continues, so you won't be sharing this one for long. It's fine, Hajime says flatly. We'd rather share a room. It's safer that way. Aizawa pauses, giving him a scrutinizing look before glancing at Fuyuhiko and Komaeda as if to double-check this statement. Fuyuhiko simply scowls at him and tosses his new belongings onto one of the bedrolls. Komaeda just smiles back unassumingly, seemingly unbothered. Based on Aizawa's heavy sigh, he's not going to be the one to push the issue with them. Someone will come get you for breakfast, Aizawa says, rubbing his forehead like he has migraine. Don't do anything stupid in the meantime. His piece, said Aizawa, ambles away, oblivious to the fact Hajime has appropriated his phone. Komaeda gently shutting the door behind him. I think that went well, Komaeda says brightly to no one in particular. Fuyuhiko snorts. Hajime just sighs because he's tired. It could be worse, he offers, but he can't work any optimism into his voice without it feeling hollow. Hajime feels like he's waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's too many alarm bells blaring in Hajime's head for him to just ignore them. Hajime? Hajime blinks back to the present at Komaeda's worried voice. I'm fine, he says automatically, before he's even registered the concern on both their faces. Fuyuhiko and Komaeda look decidedly unconvinced. It's okay if you're not, Komaeda says earnestly. Hajime squints at him dubiously. He can't exactly pinpoint why, but the statement feels a little hypocritical coming from him. Fuyuhiko just sighs like they're both hopeless, and he's the only sane man here. Look, Fuyuhiko starts bluntly. I know you were made to be more perfect than God or some shit, but we can help you, you know. It's not just all on you. Not that we're doubting you, Komaeda is quick to reassure. But we'd be happy if Hajime would rely on us sometimes too. Komaeda smiles winningly, and it should not be so pretty, Hajime thinks. 𝐎𝐿𝐽 lets out a breath. Thanks, he says with a wry smile, focusing on the warmth suffusing his chest. I'll try to remember that. Komaeda beams like this is the greatest day of his life, and 𝗧𝗪𝐽 mutters you fucking better, while staring awkwardly at the wall because feelings. 𝗎𝗨 can't help but huff out a laugh because they're all idiots, himself included. But they'll get through this. The world isn't quite so boring when you have people to share it with. Anything? 𝗵𝘃𝗀 asks coolly, arms crossed. Nothing, 𝗵PostorByakuya informs bluntly, taking a sip of coffee. The cafe is noisy with the low hum of conversation and bursts of laughter filling up the space. The normalcy is jarring. They seem to have vanished into the abyss, Gundam intones gravely as he absently pets one of his hamsters. The TV in the corner plays a colorful commercial, and 𝗵𝘃𝗀 loosely wraps her hands around her cup of tea, grounding herself using the warm ceramic. It's possible that they're not in this world with us, Byakuya admits sensibly. But it's also possible that we just haven't found them yet, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 finishes, staring into the distance. Looking outside the window, the blue sky is still a novelty. 𝗵𝘃𝗀's world has been stained red with death and destruction for the past few years. She doesn't quite remember how to live in a world without it. Byakuya dips his head in acknowledgement. Either way, we can't afford to continue looking for them like this, he says. My pickpocketing skills will only keep us afloat so far, he adds somewhat wryly. But with no identification or history, they have no way of getting a job. Well, not a normal one at least. I have an idea, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 says slowly, staring grimly down into the depths of her tea. Every world, no matter which one, has an underworld. And 𝗵𝘃𝗀 is well versed in navigating it. There's something distinctly awkward about sitting in a room of hero hopefuls, excited about saving people, while knowing you've committed mass murder, 𝗎𝗨 decides, keeping his gaze firmly on Aizawa's phone as he Googles whatever comes to mind. It only took him 5 tries to guess the password. It was his 𝐒𝐻𝗨𝗃656. 𝗎𝗨 didn't think it was possible, but somehow, 𝑢.A. manages to be even more pretentious than Hope's Peak just through their use of architecture alone. The classroom door is just overkill. 𝗧𝗪𝗃𝗀 hasn't stopped scowling since they entered the classroom, looking like he's on the cusp of either murder or suicide. Komaeda, sitting on 𝗎𝗨's other side, has the smile of someone whose reality filter is set on high. Dissociation at its finest, really. The last time 𝗎𝗨 was in high school, the 𝗧𝗏 𝗵𝗃 project happened, and the world literally ended. At least this can't likely get any worse than that, 𝗎𝗨 thinks dryly. Hey. School uniform greets cheerfully, bouncing up to them. As in, literally, just the school uniform. So, who are you guys? I don't remember seeing you at the entrance exam. 𝗎𝗨 grabs 𝗧𝗪𝗃𝗀's arm before he can instinctively reach for the kitchen knife hidden in his uniform without looking up from Aizawa's phone. Who the fuck are you? 𝗧𝗪𝗃𝗀 returns gruffly, settling at the lack of a threat. The girl laughs, seemingly unfazed by 𝗧𝗪𝗃𝗀's don't fuck with me demeanor. I'm Toru Hagakure, she says brightly, pressing her hands together, if the way her sleeves are positioned mean anything. You? None of your fucking business. 𝗎𝗨 sighs. This is just going great. Wow, talk about hostile. A boy with tape dispensers for elbows comments from 2 desks over. Don't mind him, 𝗎𝗨 offers blandly, unable to fit any actual reassurance into his voice. Emoting is difficult for him sometimes. Another thing he can trace back to Izuru. 𝗧𝗪𝗃𝗀 huffs, slouching further into his chair with. 𝗧𝗪𝗃𝗀 would probably stab him for saying so, but that's definitely a pout. So you guys know each other? Hagakure asks curiously. 𝗎𝗨 can almost picture her glancing between the 3 of them. Komaeda smiles back at her. If 𝗎𝗨 squints hard enough, he can see flowers floating around him. What the hell? We went to the same school together, Komaeda says cheerily, laying a hand on 𝗎𝗨's thigh. 𝗎𝗨 feels the warmth like a brand, It must be nice to already know some people at a new school, she says brightly, still here, and Hajime has the horrible feeling that she's just adopted them as some sort of pet project. You could say that, Komaeda offers magnanimously with an odd smile. We have extenuating circumstances, you see. Hajime can hear 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐿 take a breath, likely about to ask them another question. But Aizawa interrupts by abruptly making his presence known to the class. Oh, thank God. Unsurprisingly, it doesn't go well. At all. This was always going to be a disaster, and Hajime has never pretended to think any differently. He just might have been underestimating how bad it would be. His mistake, really. It starts like this. Hinata, my phone, Aizawa says bluntly after the class gathers out on the field. Hajime was wondering when he'd figure it out. Fuyuhiko snorts and Komaeda's smile looks vaguely amused now rather than fixed. Hajime just sighs, tossing it to him. The phone hitting Aizawa's hand with a satisfying smack. It's a little late considering Hajime has already Googled the entire history of quirks, read a few hundred articles about quirks and quirk laws, pieced together the current political climate, memorized all his classmates' names and abilities, and watched a few dozen cat videos on it. Because it was nice to know that there were normal, non-talking animals in this world too. Don't steal my phone again, Aizawa warns. One of the students, the one with literal engines in his legs, Tenya, Hajime recalls, drops his jaw, scandalized. Hajime wonders what his reaction would be if Hajime told him that stealing a phone was the least of his crimes. Downright adorable in comparison, in fact. I've tortured and killed more people than you will ever meet. I've brought entire cities to ruin. I helped end the world because I was bored. Hajime doesn't say anything, of course, because for now he's stuck with this shitty idea of being a hero student until further notice. But Hajime can't say it's not tempting as Ida sputters indignantly about how stealing a teacher's phone is wholly inappropriate, and how he needs to be setting an example as a future hero. Fuyuhiko, about as impressed with the speech as Hajime is, flips him off, earning even more outraged sputtering. Hajime is pretty sure he hears 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐿 giggle. Aizawa sighs like he's not being paid enough for this. Moving on, he says tiredly. We're going to be having quirk apprehension tests. It's probably worth noting that Hajime, Komaeda, and Fuyuhiko don't actually have quirks, though Komaeda and Hajime might as well have one. And, of course, can't forget this. The person that comes in last gets expelled, Aizawa says with obvious relish, grinning like a madman, to the horror of the entire class. Fuyuhiko raises his hand. Hajime is honestly surprised he bothered with that much as he says, "Can I be expelled now to skip these stupid fucking tests?" Based on the looks the rest class gives him, Fuyuhiko isn't earning anyone's favor with that stunt. Hajime wants to sigh, or bang his head against the wall. He's keeping his options open. Aizawa doesn't even deign to look at him as he says, "No, Kyuzuryu." Aizawa probably regrets saying that now, because Fuyuhiko seems to have made it his life's mission to force Aizawa to expel him. Basically, Fuyuhiko throws all the tests, as obviously as possibly. Aizawa's eye is starting to develop a twitch. Komaeda is only slightly better, if only because he's not actively trying to fail. His illness just makes him that physically unfit. Komaeda still somehow ends up coming in at first place though, because almost all of his test scores conveniently glitch out on Aizawa's phone, and nothing Aizawa does will change them back to normal. Aizawa looks like he's contemplating throwing his phone at the nearest wall, when Komaeda's ball throw score comes back as an infinity symbol despite the ball landing barely a couple feet away. Is this even allowed? Someone whispers theatrically to the rest of the class. Denki Kaminari, Hajime notes. Hajime kind of wishes he had popcorn. In contrast, Hajime is doing well enough for a quirkless human that Aizawa is giving him odd, borderline suspicious looks. The benefits of being a former lab rat and all that. If one ignores Komaeda's bullshit score, then Hajime is in 5th place. And then there's Izuku Midoriya. Did he just break his motherfucking finger? Fuyuhiko says, somewhere between outraged and disbelieving, even as Aizawa physically restrains Katsuki Bakugo from killing Midoriya. Hajime doesn't even want to know. For a fucking test? You don't really have room to talk after throwing said tests, Hajime comments dryly as everyone watches the drama unfolding like it's prime-time entertainment. Shifting just slightly to keep All Might's hiding place is his periphery view. There's definitely something going on there. All Might hasn't been seen for more than 3 hours a day ever since his abrupt absence some years ago. An injury, maybe? Fuyuhiko scoffs dismissively. Yeah, but I sure as hell didn't get myself hospitalized during one. Can't argue with that. Is he okay? Komaeda asks with what might be genuine concern, peering at Midoriya as Bakugo finally gives up on murdering him for the time being. If this is what a future hero looks like, then this world is in trouble. Likely feeling their judgmental stares, Bakugo turns and practically snarls at them. What? You extras have something to say? Komaeda, gifted with saying exactly the wrong thing at the wrong time, smiles sweetly and says condescendingly, "Oh, nothing. We were just surprised by how unheroic you are." Aizawa manages to stop Bakugo from physically attacking Komaeda. But it's a close thing. "It's come to my attention," 𝗫𝐳 announces brightly at the end of their first day, "that you might need phones." No shit, Fuyuhiko deadpans, the epitome of tact and diplomacy. Not. Aizawa, undoubtedly the reason for this conversation, stares studiously at the wall like if he just concentrates hard enough he won't be stuck in a room with all of them having this conversation. It doesn't work like that though. Hajime would know, since he also really doesn't want to be here. 𝗫𝐳's office hasn't changed at all from their last visit. Tastefully decorated, mostly in shades of white, and 3 cups of tea that might as well be part of the decor cooling in front of them. 𝗫𝐳 just nods serenely, still smiling cutely. "Excellent, I'm glad we agree. I'll work on getting you some." Monokuma had always been smiling too, face frozen in an uncharitable grin as he laughed. Like everything was just a big fat joke that only he knew the punchline to. It had always been too easy to forget how dangerous he was under the joke he always made out of himself right up until he threw it in your face. In this moment, though, 𝗫𝐳's smile is closer to Komaeda's than Monokuma's though. A tad oblivious, a little too sweet, and definitely knowing more than they're saying. This is almost worse in a way. It's like trying to play Clue in the dark. A lot more annoying and infinitely more uncertain. Fuyuhiko makes a face at 𝗫𝐳's offer like he thinks it's a trap. Komaeda just says brightly, "We would appreciate it," with total sincerity. Hajime squints at Komaeda, wondering if his ease with 𝗫𝐳 is a Komaeda being Komaeda thing or a Komaeda being Komaeda thing, with one being significantly more dangerous than the other. The difference between Komaeda just being whimsically baffling and him actively plotting something. The hard part is in figuring out when one becomes the other. "I also heard you all caused quite a stir today," 𝗫𝐳 adds lightly, amusement clinging to his voice. Aizawa's eye twitches at the reminder. Komaeda laughs nervously, holding up one of his hands. "Our apologies. We didn't mean to cause you any trouble." Fuyuhiko looks like he disagrees, but 𝗫𝐳 just laughs. "Oh no," 𝗫𝐳 says carelessly. "I think it could be a good thing." There's a hint of teeth in his smile as he says kindly, "The world of heroics could use some shaking up. Especially now." Always knows more than he's saying, Hajime reminds himself, feeling detached. And 𝗫𝐳 definitely knows something. "Glad we could help," Hajime says dryly, playing along. 𝗫𝐳 smiles even sweeter and Hajime kind of wants to throw his cup of tea at his face. He doesn't. "Well," 𝗫𝐳 says, clasping his paws together, "I believe I've taken up enough of your time. You must be tired." Hajime knows a dismissal when he hears one. "What do you think?" 𝗫𝐳 asks, deceptively mild, as he watches the trio make their way back to the dorms outside his office window. 𝐒𝐭𝐴ZURYO looks angry. Hands shoved into his pockets and shoulders stiff. Or maybe defensive is a better word than anger. Like he's waiting for an attack and his gruff demeanor is just camouflage to hide that fact. Komaeda's head is turned enough for Nezu to vaguely make out his air-headed smile. Relaxed as if this is just another day for him. He hides behind false smiles and underestimation as easily as Nezu himself does. Mentally and physically ill recovery girl had written in her report. In contrast, Hinata is carefully calm and controlled. His walk is confident, but not reaching into overconfidence. He walks like nothing can touch him. The fond looks and exasperated smiles he saves specifically for his friends, as well as his hand that's holding Komaeda, speaks a very different story though. Nezu has always been fond of a good mystery. They're definitely not normal civilians, is Aizawa's verdict. He's camped out in the corner of the room like he's trying to become one with the shadows there, his back to the wall. I thought so too, Nezu agrees idly. I haven't seen much from 𝐭𝐴ZURYO, Aizawa mumbles into his scarf. But there's definitely something going on with Hinata, and Komaeda isn't exactly normal either from what I've seen. Nezu has watched the footage from the quirk apprehension test. They said they didn't have quirks, right? Aizawa confirms. Indeed they did, Nezu agrees. To Detective Tsukachi no less. And, in spite of the fact that most of their answers were so vague, it was impossible to parse anything of real value from them. They'd been upfront about that at least, even seeming faintly baffled at the idea of quirks. Interesting. Is it safe for them to stay here? Aizawa asks bluntly, ever straightforward. Nezu is rather fond of that trait of his after spending most of his life in a whirlwind of mind games and hidden motives. Better here where we can keep an eye on them than out in the world unsupervised, Nezu says. Aizawa doesn't seem to completely agree. But he doesn't verbally disagree either, and Nezu will take what he can get. The file Tsukachi had delivered this morning sits prominently on his desk. A harrowing reminder of what could be at stake here. They're hiding something from us, Fuyuhiko says the instant they're back in their room, scowling heatedly. Without a doubt, Hajime agrees blandly. So? Fuyuhiko asks expectantly, crossing his arms as he leans against the closed door. What are we going to do? Hajime has a lot of bad experiences with secrets blowing up in his face at the most inopportune time. Hajime turns to Komaeda. Any ideas? Komaeda smiles. Oh, he says, mild as milk. I might have a few. Fuyuhiko actually looks concerned. Hajime almost pities you. Hey. Dude, Kaminari says. What happened to your arm? He asks, staring at Komaeda's prosthetic. Apparently tact is dead. Dude, Sero says, staring at Kaminari disbelieving. You can't just ask someone that. Even Bakugo, who's been alternating between glaring murder at Komaeda and Midoriya respectively since the start of class, looks wrong-footed at this new revelation. Komaeda blinks, glancing down at his arm, as if just remembering the prosthetic is there. Oh, this? He gives a wave with said arm. I cut it off, he says breezily, smiling vacantly. Fuyuhiko facepalms. Hajime stares at the ceiling exasperatedly, almost wishing it would cave in and save them all from this conversation. Almost, he doesn't want to jinx them. Kaminari laughs awkwardly. That's a joke, right? Sero looks like he's seriously contemplating taping Kaminari's mouth shut now. It would be an improvement. Komaeda just continues to smile airily, like none of this has anything to do with him. Fuyuhiko slams his locker door shut, glaring with vitriol at their gawking classmates. For someone barely taller than 5 feet and sporting an impressive baby face, Fuyuhiko knows how to shut people up. Ultimate Yakuza indeed. How about you all just fuck off and mind your own damn business? Fuyuhiko snaps, very obviously pissed off, and his eye patch a stark reminder. None of them like being reminded of how deep the pit Junko Inoshima shoved them into really goes. 𝐒𝐭𝐴ZURYO, Ada gasps, scandalized as he waves his arms around. Language. Hajime can't tell if 𝐸 is brave, oblivious, or suicidal. He's betting on option 2 though. Sorry, 𝗵𝗃𝗁 says insincerely. Fuck off please. Which likely hadn't been what Ida was going for, but was probably the best he was going to get. Okay, Hajime interrupts blandly. I think it's time to go. Preferably before someone ended up in a body bag. What the fuck are you guys wearing? 𝗵𝗃𝗁 snaps, his volume never seeming to get any lower than a shout. It's probably a valid question considering what everyone else is wearing. The rest of their male classmates are just still too busy awkwardly avoiding looking at them after the locker room incident to ask. And the girls are too polite to do anything but eye them curiously. Hajime and 𝗵𝗃𝗁 had settled for black suits. 𝗵𝗃𝗁's is pinstriped, of course. He looks more like himself than he has in days. Komaeda hadn't even bothered with that level of professionalism, wearing an almost exact copy of what he had in Neo World program. When someone from the support course had hesitantly brought up the idea of wearing something more heroic, 𝗵𝗃𝗁's response had been a point blank, "I'd rather kill myself." The subject had been dropped rather quickly after that. 𝗵𝗃𝗁 looks just as unimpressed with 𝗵𝗃𝗁's question now as he did then. "These are our hero costumes," he says, palpable disgust on the last 2 words. "Oh," 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐫 says brightly, like she's had an epiphany. "Are you guys going to be underground heroes? Not a bad excuse." "Sure," Hajime says vaguely, probably not the least bit convincing. He probably has an ultimate acting talent somewhere, but honestly, why bother? 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝗫's hero costume is literally just a pair of gloves. It's a smart choice, honestly, allowing her to let allies know where she is and communicate silently with hand gestures, but easily removable so she can fully utilize her quirk. Hajime briefly wonders if this means she isn't wearing anything else, and nope, not thinking about it. Hopefully, though, the school would have found a way to keep one of their students from walking around completely naked, regardless of if anyone else can see them. The longer they stay here, the more often Hajime wonders how and hopes Peak for that matter hasn't been sued within an inch of its life. Like fuck, 𝗵𝗃𝗁 exclaims. Are you shitheads even taking this seriously? Not really, no, Hajime says bluntly. 𝗵𝗃𝗁 snorts at his frank response, and Komaeda's smile ticks up into something realer. Hajime will take his wins where he can get them. Huh? A vein pops on 𝗵𝗃𝗁's face, clearly displeased about his answer. Then why are you extras even here? Get lost. I could say the same about you, Komaeda comments, innocence turned up to 11. Oh snap, Ashido gasps dramatically in the background. You got something to say, dead boy walking? 𝗵𝗃𝗁 snarls like a particularly ferocious dog. The nickname fits, Hajime thinks wryly. Probably a little too well, actually. Even if 𝗵𝗃𝗁 was likely only referencing Komaeda's ghostly appearance with his white hair and sickly pale skin. Komaeda raises his hands in surrender, laughing nervously and smiling sweetly in a placating manner. His words are none of the above, though. Oh, I just meant that you act like such a stereotypical villain that it's hard to picture you as a hero. Oh shit, 𝗬𝗫 whispers into the harsh silence. Shots fired, Asui agrees, her voice an odd croak. Where's the fucking popcorn when you need it? 𝗵𝗃𝗁 wonders aloud. All Might takes that moment to gracelessly interrupt with the day's activity. It kind of backfires. Are you fucking kidding me? 𝗵𝗃𝗁 explodes, almost literally. All partnerships are final, All Might insists, smile carved like marble onto his face. 𝗵𝗃𝗁 turns to glare at Komaeda, who beams back sunnily. I look forward to working with you, Komaeda says brightly. Hostility doesn't really mean anything substantial to Komaeda, assuming he can even recognize it. Hajime feels like he's watching a catastrophe in motion. 𝗵𝗃𝗁 looks like he wants to go for murder attempt number 3. So, All Might forges on bravely. With our villain team decided, the hero team will be Midoriya and Yaoyorozu. Based on Midoriya's terrified squeak, this is the stuff of his nightmares and Bakugo's dreams considering his bloodthirsty smile. This is going to end badly. I'll pray for you, Hajime tells Midoriya seriously. Midoriya, strangely enough, doesn't look comforted, or any less likely to collapse into a puddle of anxiety. Yaoyorozu looks like she's having second thoughts about everything. Smart girl. They're so dead, Fuyuhiko says to Hajime the instant the two pairings head for the training grounds. Wait, how do you know that? Kirishima asks curiously. Fuyuhiko snorts. Because it's Komaeda. There's the sound of distant explosions. Momo feels a little bad about leaving Midoriya behind, but part of being a hero is having faith in your comrades. She would just have to trust that he could hold his own for now. I was wondering when you'd show up, Komaeda says lightly, even going so far as to give her a friendly little wave using his flesh and blood hand from where he stands in front of the bomb. His smile is serene. Like Momo doesn't even register as a threat to him. Momo doesn't know much about Komaeda's quirk, but it seems to be something to do with luck or probability based on what she gathered yesterday. You're welcome to try and stop me, Komaeda adds casually to Momo's silence, slipping his hands into his pockets. His smile is lovely, so lovely it sends a jolt of terror down Momo's spine. But, well, you probably shouldn't push your luck, Komaeda says kindly, almost sheepishly, like he's giving advice rather than issuing a warning. Momo isn't about to turn back now, though. Momo takes a step forward, the loudest explosion yet rings throughout the building caves in beneath her feet. And Komaeda's still smiling. The screens they're watching abruptly cut to black as the entire building collapses. All Might's smile is frozen in what might be panic. The room is dead silent. This kind of shit is exactly why we don't separate Hajime and Komaeda, Fuyuhiko says into the appropriately terrified silence. Exactly, Jiro repeats dubiously. Exactly, Hajime confirms blandly to the stunned room, expression flat enough to cut yourself on. Fuyuhiko thinks Hajime should just be happy that Komaeda hadn't planned on blowing up the building this time. Well, probably. Komaeda's solutions to most problems were murder and terrorism after all. Uraraka lets out a strangled noise. Are they alive? She squeaks out, hand pressed to her mouth in horror. Probably, Hajime says noncommittally, sounding bored. Fuyuhiko honestly can't tell if he made some ultimate bullshit calculations in his head to come to that conclusion, or if he just has that much faith in Komaeda's luck. Either way, Fuyuhiko's willing to take his word on it. So, what do we even do now that there's been, an actual emergency? Kaminari wonders out loud, scratching his head. On cue, panicked yelling breaks out among their classmates, and All Might still smiling, however strained, as he desperately tries to reassure them. In the chaos, no one notices Hajime slipping out of the room, and Fuyuhiko smirks quietly. The file is waiting on the top of Nezu's desk like it was set out for Hajime to find. Maybe it was. Inside are gruesome pictures. Bodies torn apart and used like dolls. The back wall is painted in blood with the words, "This world is ours now," and, most damning of all, covering almost every inch of the wall in overlapping writing is, "Despair." The file is dated on the day Hajime and the others arrived. Hajime closes his eyes. The remnants of despair came with them. Izuku coughs. It's dark and dusty, and he feels like he can't breathe. Oh God, where is he? Oh good, you're awake, says a light voice. I was starting to worry. It takes a moment for him to place it, squinting at the darkness pressing in around him. Komaeda, he croaks. And you're lucid. That makes this easier, says that same bright voice, at odds with everything else around him. An ocean of calm that cannot be moved. What? Izuku hacks out cough, awkwardly pushing himself even as his body aches in protest. What happened? You don't remember? There's something about the mild disappointment and borderline condescension in that voice that makes Izuku want to curl up in shame. I believe Bakugo let out quite a nasty attack, and ended up caving in the building. A long suffering sigh. What bad luck, honestly. Izuku remembers a deafening boom, the heat of an explosion, the walls coming down, and then nothing. Izuku's eyes are adjusting now, able to make out the vague outline of Komaeda sitting lackadaisically in dark, leaning idly back against a piece of rubble, and another prone figure laying near him. Whose? Yaoyorozu, Komaeda answers, and Izuku thinks he can make out the shadow of his sweet smile. Izuku shudders. Apparently we were right above you, so when the building came down we landed near each other. She's still unconscious, though it's too dark for me to tell much else. Izuku tries to swallow, but his throat is dry and caked with dust. He coughs again, pressing a hand to mouth and feeling something dripping down his forehead. It takes him a moment to identify the taste of iron catching on his lips. Blood? Kaken? He asks anyway, trying to breathe through his panic. The darkness makes the space feel too small, too cramped. No idea, Komaeda says indifferently. Tone still that same unshakable, empty cheerfulness that makes Izuku feel cold. Like Komaeda couldn't care less what happened to Kaken. Like he could be dead and Komaeda would still be smiling like it couldn't even touch him. This is perfect though, Komaeda says brightly. They're tapped beneath a building. Kaken could be dead, and Yaoyorozu could be dying. What about this is perfect? Don't you care? Izuku wants to ask, but can't find his voice underneath his crushing panic. I wanted to ask you some questions, Komaeda continues airily. As an aspiring hero, I mean. Izuku feels like a mouse trapped in front of cat. Like he's being toyed with for entertainment. If you died right now, Komaeda says with a smile that somehow edges into sinister despite being completely unchanged. How would you feel? Izuku swallows thickly and presses further back into the rubble behind him. In Hajime's opinion, it doesn't turn out too badly. But then his perspective might be a bit skewed. Komaeda comes out without a scratch on him. Which shouldn't even be possible, but that pretty much sums up his entire existence so. The greatest tragedy here is his ruined jacket, and the amount of conditioner it will take to get his hair color back to white. The whole experience probably doesn't even reach Komaeda's top 100 most traumatizing experiences. Bakugo has a broken leg, but is cursing up a storm, so he's probably alright. Yaoyorozu is unconscious with a concussion, but that's what Recovery Girl is for. Hajime is suddenly feeling enlightened on how the school hasn't been sued yet. Midoriya is arguably the worst off. His injuries are relatively minor, with only a few cuts here and there. But he's also the poor bastard that had to spend a whole hour alone, fully conscious, with Nagito Komaeda. Even now Midoriya is sending Komaeda increasingly unnerved looks every few seconds, which is a pretty typical symptom to continued exposure to Komaeda. Hajime decides he'll only really start to worry if Midoriya starts going off on hope tangents. But no one's dead, which makes for a successful day in Hajime's book. All Might is the only real casualty, and that's only because Aizawa is going to murder him. May he rest in pieces. And peace, Hajime supposes wryly. As it is, Hajime is pretty sure All Might's been banned from interacting with the class, without some form of adult supervision. According to Aizawa, All Might no longer counts as a responsible adult. The number one hero, ladies and gentlemen. Fuyuhiko actually claps watching the verbal beat down, impressed, with Komaeda cheerfully following suit. Hajime is pretty sure he saw more than a few people recording the entire thing on their phones. The rest of the activity has been postponed until tomorrow, Aizawa mumbles once they return to their classroom. Bakugo and Yaoyorozu still in the infirmary. For now, I'll have you pick a class representative since we were going to do that tomorrow instead. I have a meeting. Don't get me unless someone is dying. Again. With those cheerful parting words, Aizawa retreats to his sleeping bag and out of the classroom. It's a mistake on his part. It almost immediately becomes a riot afterwards. It's the battle of the class representatives. Hajime imagines this is how this world will end. It's utter chaos. Chairs and desks are thrown around. 𝐎𝐩𝐢𝐽 accidentally melts part of the blackboard. Kirishima somehow punches a hole through the wall. Tokoyami and Midoriya are huddled under their desks for safety. Aoyama is taking a selfie for whatever reason, and Kaminari just tripped over Koda, who has just curled up into a ball on the floor and given up entirely. Komaeda is the eye of the storm, untouchable and equally unflappable by everything happening around him. His level of aplomb is enviable as a ruler sails past his face, and he smiles like this is all a pleasant afternoon tea time. What a mad banquet of darkness, Tokoyami says, hunkered down behind Komaeda. Hajime absently tilts his head just enough to avoid the pencil case that comes flying at him. Fuyuhiko doesn't actually care about becoming class representative at all, but he's trying his damnedest to murder 𝗵𝗃𝗲 after he caught him trying to look up the girl's skirts. And even then, Hajime doesn't think Fuyuhiko actually cares that much about 𝗵𝗃𝗲's behavior, exactly. More likely, he's simply using it as an excuse to exercise his frustrations out onto an acceptable target. Either way, it's working. You try that again, Fuyuhiko growls at 𝗵𝗃𝗲, a death toll sounding. Hajime makes the sign of the cross, pressing his hands together in prayer, all without a change in expression. And I'm going to nail your fucking balls to the goddamn wall. And I don't just mean your hair, he stresses. Jiru emphatically applauds, giving a standing ovation. And that is definitely 𝐒𝐻𝐈 recording the whole thing on her phone. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 looks like his entire life is flashing before his eyes, trembling tearfully. Komaeda helpfully hands him a paper and pencil to write his will with, all with a smile. Komaeda will probably be the one to helpfully bury his body afterwards too, happily at that. Unlike Fuyuhiko, Komaeda likely does actually care about the girl's dignity, in that weirdly nice guy way of his that tends to get forgotten beneath his layers of crazy. Hit him harder, Uraraka cheers, punching a fist up into the air. Uraraka? Midoriya exclaims in shock, gaping up at her from where he's still hiding under his desk for safety. Make him suffer, Ashido crows gleefully. Kyuzuryu, please put down the desk, Ida yells from the front of the classroom, frantically waving his arms. And that's how Fuyuhiko reluctantly becomes the class representative, with Ida as the vice representative, and Aizawa almost kills them when he gets back to find the classroom destroyed. Hajime doesn't quite understand the odd, almost melancholic looks on both Komaeda and Fuyuhiko's face as Fuyuhiko is named the class representative though. What's wrong? Hajime asks bluntly, voice pitched low enough to avoid being carried. His eyebrows furrowed as everyone else gets up to leave for the day. Komaeda just smiles wistfully, hair still dyed a light brown from the dust and debris earlier, as Fuyuhiko studiously stares out the window. Did you know Chiaki was our class representative? Komaeda asks kindly, voice soft with a reverence that he only reserves for her and Makoto. The information still feel like a punch to the gut as much as the name and reminder it brings does. Oh, Hajime says blankly. A puddle of red, 𝐒𝐻𝐈 pin tears why. Was she good at it? Hajime finds himself asking, unable to manage any other tone aside from blank. The best, Fuyuhiko says roughly. It's raw, and it hurts, and it's honest. Komaeda slowly grabs Hajime's hand under the table. We couldn't have asked for a better one, he assures brightly. Though she did always make us play stupid games together, Fuyuhiko laments without any real irritation, cheek resting on a loose fist. Hajime lets out a choked laugh. That sounds like her. Hajime squeezes Komaeda's hand, focusing on the warmth of it. I'm sure you'll do great, Komaeda tells Fuyuhiko brightly. You think? Fuyuhiko says dubiously, crossing his arms. Of course, Hajime agrees, smiling. This too is another step in the right direction in its own way. Shit, Fuyuhiko sums up later when Hajime tells them what he found out. They're like fucking cockroaches. They just won't fucking die, he gripes. It's not a bad description, honestly. They're sitting outside for once, because Hajime has considered the possibility of their dorms being bugged. The sun is setting, There's a stray leaf in Komaeda's hair, and 𝗧𝗪𝐿 is halfway through teaching him how to make a flower crown. Hajime is pretty sure Sonya's to blame for that knowledge. There wasn't a whole lot of entertainment on an abandoned island overgrown with wildlife, while almost everyone else was still comatose. The teachers probably think we're terrorists, Komaeda comments pleasantly. They wouldn't exactly be wrong in that assumption either, Hajime thinks wryly. What should we do? 𝗧𝗪𝐿 asks seriously, flower crown crooked on his head, meeting Hajime's mismatched eyes. Hajime sighs, allowing himself to run a hand through his hair in a show of frustration. Frankly, there isn't much we can do stuck in school like this. Komaeda hums thoughtfully, staring into the distance. We can't, he stresses almost absently, musing aloud. Komaeda thinking is always a bad sign. Hajime and 𝗧𝗪𝐿 send him identically suspicious looks. Oh, Komaeda says sheepishly, catching their looks, and raising his hands in surrender. Don't mind me. Just the thoughts of a nobody, he says breezily. Hajime flicks his forehead for the self-deprecating comment. Just don't do anything too crazy, Hajime says dryly because he has little faith in his ability to stop Komaeda without taking drastic measures like chaining him up. And Hajime's not Kazuichi. But Komaeda's already giving him that vacant smile of his. The one that says, thank you very much for your input, but I'm going to ignore or miss the point of absolutely everything you just said. And some battles just aren't worth fighting, Hajime thinks. I'll keep that in mind, Komaeda blatantly lies, finishing up his own flower crown. It's not actually half bad. Some of the flowers got a little crushed and bruised in the process, and it's not quite as neat as 𝗧𝗪𝐿's, but it's a functional flower crown nonetheless. Komaeda plops it onto Hajime's head. It looks good on you, Komaeda says brightly, with a smile that should not be adorable considering everything. Hajime will not blush. He will not blush. Don't fucking blush, 𝗧𝗪𝐿 snorts at the look on his face, and Hajime glares at him. The alleyway is dark and shadowed in the night. A man strolls down it idly, pausing as something crosses his path. A hamster blinks up at him. What the last things he sees is a flash of silver hair, the blood-red eyes of a demon, and his blood blooming across the ground. Battle Trial Part 2, Hajime thinks dryly. Now with the added addition of Aizawa glaring at All Might from a dark corner like a creature of the night. All Might's smile looks decidedly nervous now. And, of course, how the fuck did you become class representative? Bakugo demands when he finds out. Kirishima mouths sorry to them from behind him with a sheepish smile, explaining how he found out. I don't fucking know, 𝗧𝗪𝐿 snaps back, bristling. Hajime has the sudden image of a cat and dog fighting. Or maybe a kitten and chihuahua fighting. That seems more accurate. Yaoyorozu, the only other person to miss the warfare raged in the classroom, blinks in innocent surprise. How did that happen? He murdered Minato, Hajime deadpans without looking up, scrolling through recent news articles on his new phone. Aizawa had literally chucked the phone at his face this morning. They're bugged, aren't they? 𝗧𝗪𝐿 had deadpanned, dangling his phone between his thumb and pointer finger like it was cursed. Probably, Hajime commented idly, fiddling with his phone. Komaeda had just peered down at his own phone curiously. Hajime honestly wouldn't have been surprised to find out Komaeda hadn't owned a phone before. Or at least had never owned the same one for longer than a week. 𝗧𝗪𝐿 scowls at him. It's more cute than intimidating, honestly. I did fucking not. Don't worry, Hagakure is quick to reassure. It was very cool. Uraraka and Ishido nod sagely in agreement. Asui even gives 𝗧𝗪𝐿 a thumbs up. Bro, I think even I fell in love with you a little, 𝗧𝗪 says seriously, pressing a hand to his heart. 𝗧𝗪𝐿 makes a face at all the praise. I'm not dead, Minato protests, still very much alive and a testament to Recovery Girl's treatment. And keeping a 10-foot distance between him and 𝗧𝗪𝐿 at all times. Sometimes we can still hear his voice, Kaminari adds, pretending to wipe a tear from his eye. Ieyasu looks like she regrets asking at all. Komaeda just beams at Fuyuhiko, grasping his hands. "I'm so glad your hope is shining so brightly," he says with utmost sincerity. There's actual tears in his eyes. "What the fuck?" Chihiru says emphatically, mouth a flat, unimpressed line, as she looks at the spectacle. A fair response to Komaeda. "No one will ever find your body," Fuyuhiko warns Komeda's smiling face, shoving him away but not nearly as roughly as he could have. Hajime ducks his head to hide his amused smile behind his phone. "𝗧𝗏 isn't being paid enough for this. I think the three of them are demons sent from hell to torture me," 𝗧𝗏 mutters, face down on his desk. Hisashi laughs, if only because he probably doesn't realize quite how serious 𝗧𝗏 is about this. "They're not that bad." 𝗧𝗏 lifts his head, just enough to give Hisashi a flat look. "Everyone has heard about training incident. Incident and not accident," 𝗧𝗏 had noted with increasing exhaustion. "And that's not an exaggeration. Literally everyone has. Including the damn reporters camped outside. Now harping at you, about safety precautions and the well-being of the students like that had ever mattered to them before now. Hero work isn't safe. That's fact, as much as the public likes to pretend otherwise. They're menaces to society." Hisashi concedes to his pointed look and words with a sheepish grin. "Accidents happen, you know that," he says, apologetic but honest. 𝗧𝗏 does. Hero training is meant to prepare the students for these kinds of risks. That's the job. Even if 𝗧𝗏 kind of wishes they hadn't just been thrown into the deep end like that. 𝗧𝗏 might be harboring a slight, minuscule, inconsequential grudge against All Might for the whole mess. Whatever. All Might will survive. Probably. If nothing else, the whole disaster had only driven home that All Might shouldn't be left alone with rambunctious teenagers unsupervised. Which was now also 𝗧𝗏's job. Joy. "They're walking disasters," 𝗧𝗏 says instead, shifting the conversation back on topic. Hisashi lets him, and 𝗧𝗏 remembers why he keeps him around at all. "Aren't all teenagers?" he teases lightly. "Not like this," 𝗧𝗏 deadpans. "Even if you ignore the fact that they're actually 23 and hardly teenagers at all. Dimensional travelers aren't exactly something you stumble across every day or ever, much less ones so obviously suspicious." "Keep an eye on them," Nedzu had said. Easier said than done, 𝗧𝗏 thinks dryly. Nagito Komaeda practically radiates sketchiness behind his mild smile and ever-present politeness. His mere presence alone has already damaged the structural integrity of two buildings that 𝗧𝗏 knows of despite him practically being on death's door already. According to Recovery Girl, he should have been dead years ago. Fuyuhiko Kyuzuryu is a blatant terror and doesn't bother pretending to be anything else, seeming to have made it his mission in life to be as uncooperative as possible. 𝗧𝗏 gets a headache just looking at him. Hajime Hinata is a menace, but at least he's quieter and subtler about it in comparison to the other two. Phone incident aside. Even if he does seem to be playing some kind of mental chess game with Nedzu. 𝗧𝗏 doesn't even want to know. Sometimes 𝗧𝗏 wonders why he bothers with doing anything. And then he remembers the invaluable existence of caffeine and cats. The only two things the universe got right in his opinion. 𝗧𝗏 sighs tiredly, head dropping to meet his desk again. And Hisashi pats him on the back, sympathetically, his wide grin ruining the effort entirely. Uraraka and Fuyuhiko are picked for the hero team. "Team cute," Zero whispers in the background. Ashido giggles. No, Kaminari says. "Wait for it." He pauses dramatically. "Team sweet cheeks." Zero stares at him in awe. "Bro," he breathed. "It's perfect." "You're both idiots," Chihiru deadpans. "You shits just really want to die today, huh?" Fuyuhiko says bluntly, skipping straight past anger and indignation and right into plotting their untimely murder. It's a stark contrast from Uraraka's embarrassed blush that's launching a takeover over the entirety of her face. From the looks of it, the blush is winning. Komaeda just pats 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲's shoulder comfortingly. It doesn't really work considering the next words out of his mouth are, "Don't worry, I think you're very cute. I mean, you're not Hajime, but..." As always, Komaeda has the innate talent to completely miss the point of something while saying exactly the wrong thing. Not for the first time, Hajime wonders if Komaeda is trying to coax 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 into committing an actual homicide, or if that's just the general effect Komaeda has on people. Hajime's pretty sure it's the latter, but he also can't discount the former because Komaeda's just that crazy regardless of how many therapy sessions Hajime has with him. Another word, and you start losing fingers, 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 warns, looking like he's ready to burn down another world, if that's what it takes to get Komaeda to shut up. "Huh?" Komaeda says, completely clueless. Hajime should probably not find it adorable, but here he is anyway. "Why?" 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 doesn't deign that with an answer beyond a sour look. "Are we just ignoring to ignore his comment about Hajime?" Jiryu asks the room. "Yes," Hajime deadpans, staring up at ceiling. One of the tiles is cracked. He notes and regrets every choice he has ever made to get to this point. There are a lot. Most of them have to do with Hope's Peak. "You're all fucking idiots," Bakugo announces, sounding like their very existence disgusts him. He's not wrong. Ishido and Shoji are the villain team. Hajime doesn't even need his ultimate analyst talent to tell him how this will end. "Good luck," Komaeda tells 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 brightly. Hajime doesn't know how Komaeda can say that with a straight face considering his everything. "Shut the fuck up, you'll jinx it," 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 says bluntly. Hajime chokes on air, coughing. "It goes like this. Give us the fucking bomb," 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 demands, pressing a gun to Uraraka's head. There's a long, long silence. "Is this even allowed?" Kaminari asks as 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 stands off against Shoji and Ishido with his tranquilizer gun pressed to Uraraka's head. Apparently 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 had decided to take the hero part of his role and ball it up before remorselessly tossing it into the trash. Ida stares at the screen, utterly aghast at the very sight of someone using such unheroic means. All Might's smile is decidedly unsure. "It's not against the rules," he settles on uneasily. Aizawa snorts in the background, cocooned in his sleeping bag and very obviously not helping. "No, wait, 𝗧𝗫 interrupts, flapping a hand at the screen. "Back up. He gets a gun?" "Tranquilizer," Hajime corrects blandly. Apparently heroes without perfect trajectory control don't get real guns. The quotation marks are audible. 𝗧𝗂𝐽𝐾𝐲 had been less than happy to find that out. Safety laws didn't mean much to 𝗧𝗂𝗽𝗾 considering the environment he'd grown up in. Zero opens and closes his mouth. That's fair, he eventually decides. Shoji and Ishido seem equally as cluelessly about how to handle these turn of events. "I don't think this is how it's supposed to go," Shoji offers somewhat dryly. "Says who?" 𝗧𝗂𝗽𝗾 asks dismissively, gun still pressed to Uraraka's head. "It's probably for the best that they're around the same height, or this would be a lot more undignified." As it is using Uraraka as a shield, 𝗧𝗂𝗽𝗾 unceremoniously shoots the villain team, pink paint splattering across their costumes as they're killed. "Hey!" Ishido yelps in surprise and indignation, her and Shoji both too startled to move in time. The whole thing is over in less than 5 minutes. Komaeda is the only one that claps in the dumb silence that follows 𝗧𝗂𝗽𝗾's win. "What the fuck?" Bakugo yells angrily at the screen. And then it's Hajime's turn. A girl sits at a table in the back of a bar. Silver hair worn in 2 braids and eyes like blood that never miss a thing. A sword rests almost innocuously at her side, propped up against the table. "Would like a drink?" Jiren tries, aiming for affable. It's a good strategy to have friendly relations with his customers. Pico looks deeply unimpressed by it. "No," she says bluntly, tone brooking no argument. Paranoid, this one. Jiren decides to make a tactical retreat. "Excellent work on your last job," he comments, smirking at her from across the table. "Your flattery means nothing to me," 𝗵𝗃𝗀 says coolly, sitting with all the dignity of a queen on her throne. 𝗔𝗫 doesn't doubt it. He laughs anyway, sliding over a stack of money. Of course. Still, the client was very happy with your work." 𝗵𝗃𝗀 picks up the money indifferently, smoothly counting out the bills. The woman is a mystery. She appeared out of the blue one day, and nothing 𝗔𝗫 tried dug up any information on her. It's a first for him. "Your friends aren't here with you?" 𝗔𝗫 asks idly, lighting his cigarette. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 pauses, gaze sharp enough to kill as it pins him in place. "They're none of your concern," she warns coldly. The temperature might have dropped a few degrees. A hand rests lightly on her blade now. Only a fool wouldn't recognize the implied threat. 𝗔𝗫 isn't a fool. He raises his hands in surrender. "I actually have another job offer for you, though it's a bit unusual," he offers under the pretense of a peace offering. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 glances up, expression unreadably neutral as light glints off of her glasses. That he has her attention at all is a silent question in and of itself. 𝗔𝗫 smirks. "It's about a group called the League of Villains. Apparently, they're hiring. Thoughts?" "This might be a little difficult," Hajime mutters, staring stoically down at Todoroki and Asui from the window. "Only a little, though." "What's the plan, monsieur?" Aoyama asks, his smile an unmovable thing and his hands framing his face. His eyes actually twinkle. Yuga Aoyama is the kind of eccentric that can rival Gundam Tanaka on his worst days and could commit murder and probably get off with an insanity defense. It's been a while, Hajime thinks, since he has been so out of his depth on how to handle someone. It reminds him a bit of how he felt when Komaeda was introducing to all the other ultimates on Jabberwock Island. Baffled and with a healthy dose of "how are you real?" It's almost nostalgic. Hajime smiles. It's an objectively nice smile. Attractive even. "Ah," Komaeda says softly in realization at the sight of said smile over the screen. His smile looks almost pitying if you squint and tilt your head just so. "They're so fucking dead," Fuyuhiko says almost idly, absently loosening his tie. Kirishima glances between them. "What?" he asks, blessedly oblivious and obviously confused. Neither answer. It doesn't matter what happens next, the battle has already been decided, and they both know it. The hallways are quiet. "Are you sure about this, Todoroki?" Asui, 𝐒𝐭𝐴lmitsu, asks, trailing behind him. "We don't have a choice," 𝗏𝗏 answers indifferently as they slowly make their way further into the building. 𝗏𝗏 would have just frozen the entire building, but it's a little risky without knowing their location. He doesn't want to accidentally kill them. Plus, the last thing 𝗏𝗏 wants is to recreate the training incident from yesterday, which leaves them with hunting down Hinata and Aoyama the old-fashioned way. 𝗏𝗏 isn't exactly thrilled about it either. "True," Asui croaks in agreement, thoughtful. 𝗏𝗏 takes a moment to appreciate how reasonable and sane she is in comparison to the disaster that is the rest of their class. At least one of them has their priorities in order. The hallways are still dead silent. Who's silent? 𝗏𝗏 realizes. Where are Asui's footsteps behind him? "Asui?" 𝗏𝗏 calls, turning. But there's no one behind one. Just an empty hallway. That's probably bad. 𝗏𝗏 is starting to think he's made a miscalculation. Or several. He squints through the steam, trying to make out anything beyond shadows and movement that might be all in his head. Several pipes had burst earlier, clogging up the hallway and limiting his field of vision. 𝗏𝗏 is fairly certain it's intentional. The ceiling above him caves in, forcing him to throw himself out of the way, carefully keeping a mental track of where the walls are. He's tried freezing it, but it was honestly more difficult to navigate around his ice and not accidentally injure himself by unfreezing the rubble stuck in it and risk getting hit by the debris in the ice than it is to just dodge it entirely. 𝗏𝗏's pretty sure that's part of the plan or a plan. While 𝗏𝗏 may have been concerned about bringing down the building Hinata and Aoyama do not seem to share the same reticence. 𝐎𝐸𝐲 may have been underestimating them. The plan, from what 𝐎𝐸𝐲 can gather, is to limit how much he can use his quirk while simultaneously exhausting him. It's working honestly. Being in an enclosed hallway is an advantage for his quirk, little chances to miss that way, but not under these circumstances where using it backs him into a corner just as much. Presumably taking 𝐬𝐸𝐴 and leaving him without support is meant to further that. As it is, he's being herded to right where they want him to be. It's slightly grating, being toyed with and tossed around like this without ever getting so much as a glimpse of his opponents. Just as 𝐎𝐸𝐲 thinks it, as if on cue, he catches a blur out of the corner of his eye, the steam churning at the displacement of air, and then click. The handcuffs close around 𝐎𝐸𝐲's wrist before he can even process what happened, leaving him to blink dumbly at his new accessory. In front of him is Hajime, looking perfectly pristine and without a speck of dirt on him or his suit. The villain team wins, announces All Might's voice from over the speakers. For the first time in a long time, 𝐎𝐸𝐲 feels something very close to embarrassment crushing in on him. He's fairly certain he doesn't like it. All according to the plan, Aoyama says, winking at air as he poses dramatically. Hajime doesn't want to know. Well, Togami says impatiently, eyes narrowed and a finger tapping impatiently on his crossed arm. Kazuichi just lets out a frustrated groan, tugging at his hair. There's grease smeared across his cheek and covering his hands, now getting into his hair too. I have no idea what this machine was meant to do, Kazuichi lays out bluntly. I'm not even sure how it worked in the first place, considering most of this wiring is done wrong. Kazuichi waves a hand towards the space he took the paneling off to reveal a mess of wires. Kirigiri doesn't quite frown as she says flatly, Komaeda. It isn't a question. Komaeda, Togami agrees, scowl reaching apocalyptic levels. Komaeda, Kazuichi grumbles, muttering under his breath about how physics don't work like that. Or shouldn't anyway. It's an old complaint. Well worn and familiar. Kirigiri sighs delicately, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. At least we can probably assume they're alive, she notes, sounding clinically detached. I doubt Komaeda's or Hajime's luck would let them be killed off so easily. Good point. It's about the only reliable point they have right now. Kirigiri stares stoically at the machine, a loose fist balanced beneath her chin with the same kind of thoughtfulness Kazuichi has seen her give particularly difficult cases. Togami is staring at the machine like the force of his gaze alone will be enough to make it bow down to him and reveal all its secrets. Kazuichi wishes it was that easy. It would certainly make his job easier. But then, Mikan speaks up hesitantly, flinching slightly when they turn to look at her. Where are they? That's the question now, isn't it? Kirigiri murmurs, more to herself than anyone else. The silence that follows feels stifling. Don't worry, Ibuki interrupts cheerily, throwing her arms around Mikan and earning a squeak from said girl. I'm sure they're fine. Ibuki's optimism is contagious and spreads accordingly. Akane grins, smacking a fist into her palm. Of course they are. None of them would go down easily. Nekomaru nods sagely in agreement next to her, and Mikan manages a weak, tremulous smile at them all, still clearly worried. Kazuichi rubs a hand down his face, shoulders slumped over and looking patently exhausted. I'll keep looking into it, he says, knocking lightly on the metal behemoth behind him. But don't get your hopes up. Togami nods regally at this. Do what you can. From anyone else, the words might be encouragement. Coming from Togami, they sound like a command. Nothing more and nothing less. The rest of your class will be arriving in a few days, Togami adds, somewhat sourly, too deliberate for it to really be considered an afterthought. That's great, Ibuki cheers, a ball of energy fixed with a jump cable and given human form. Kazuichi doesn't know where she gets it all, though that might just be because he's running on about 5 hours of sleep. Even the thought of seeing Sonia isn't enough to erase Kazuichi's pensive frown as he stares at the machine. He mentally rolls up his sleeves. Time to get back to work. Wait for us, he thinks fiercely. 𝐸's cafeteria. Like most things with 𝐸 is both giant, functional, and expensive, which just about sums up 𝐸's entire aesthetic. Bakugo glares murder at them per usual. Kaminari steals a bite of food from his plate, making him whip his head around to explode literally and figuratively at him. Shiro and Mina laugh, Kirishima grinning in amusement. Todoroki is just staring dead at Hajime with a look of intense focus. That might become a problem at some point. Meanwhile, Midoriya is sending Komaeda increasingly frequent glances with varying amounts of wariness and curiosity. Hajime will likely have to deal with that at some point too. At the same table as Midoriya, Uraraka waves at Fuyuhiko cheerfully as he passes by. Who the fuck do I need to kill to get a cup of coffee around here? Fuyuhiko grumbles, plopping down grumpily onto Hajime's right, his tray noticeably absent of any coffee. Aoyama's eyes twinkle literally with amusement across from him. There's probably some in the teacher's lounge, Monsieur Fuyuhiko, he comments lightly, smile as pleasant as can be. Please don't give him ideas, Hajime says, something equal parts exasperated and pleading entering his voice. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐿 just giggles. You guys were amazing earlier, she praises, tone chirpy in its cheer. Aoyama agrees immediately, smile luminous. Komaeda must have been taking notes from Aoyama because his smile sparkles. Of course they were, he says brightly, with the utmost confidence. Especially with their hope shining so brightly, Hajime shoves a piece of toast into Komaeda's mouth. It's multi-purpose in that it simultaneously shuts him up and gives him nutrients because, somehow, Hajime has become Komaeda's keeper. Komaeda obediently chews, unfazed and still smiling. I can't believe this place is still running, Fuyuhiko comments incredulously, obviously sour, waving his chopsticks as if to encompass the entirety of 𝐸. They literally have an entire fucking city in their backyard. Where the fuck do they get the money for all this shit? And it is an entire city, existing for the sole purpose of hero to bees to have something they can safely destroy. That definitely felt like overkill, even if the need for it was understandable on some levels. It's not an actual city, 𝐻𝐻𝐿 says, her sleeve moving in front of her in an approximation of someone waving their hand back and forth. It's mostly just some buildings. None of them even have proper heating or electric systems beyond some lighting. And with cementos, they're probably pretty easy to repair. Who? Fuyuhiko asks flatly, nonplussed. He's another hero that works here, 𝐻𝐻𝐿 explains cheerily, taking a bite of food. It's odd watching her eat, the food slowly disappearing into what looks like thin air in bite-sized chunks. He can manipulate cement. If 𝐻𝐻𝐿 finds the gaps in their knowledge odd, then she's kind enough to stay quiet about it. Without an expression to gauge, it's difficult to tell how much 𝐻𝐻𝐿 knows, or at least suspects at any given moment. Fuyuhiko lowers his chopsticks. That sounds way too fucking convenient, he says, squinting suspiciously into the distance. They just happen to have a guy that can instantly repair buildings on their staff. Fuyuhiko almost sounds annoyed at how perfectly it all matches up. Principal Nezu handpicks the staff, Aoyama offers, smiling, hands framing his face and eyes glittering. That explains a lot, Hajime says vaguely. Recovery girl for the students and cementos for the property damage. A perfect combo, really. No wonder hasn't been sued yet. They have an airtight excuse and way out for everything. Whatever the two of them are being paid, it isn't nearly enough. Also has a lot of sponsors, 𝐻𝐻𝐿 adds, her chopsticks swishing absently through the air. With a lot of them being former students. School pride and all that. Hajime's lips form a flat line. With every big name in Japan backing them, including their former students, Hope's Peak had practically been a kingdom unto itself. existing outside of even the law in some cases. Your 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐽 𝐵𝑘𝐻𝑢𝐻 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐽 was not hope's peak, but sometimes it was difficult not to see the similarities between the two. And, of course, that's when the alarm goes off. That doesn't sound good, Komaeda says, a bit redundantly as everyone panics around them. He actually sounds concerned too, frowning ever so slightly. He also doesn't make any move to get up. Hajime feels immune to panic at this point in his life, propping his chin on his hand with a bored expression as he idly tracks the movements of the students. Hagakure says, sounding nervous and fiddling with her uniform skirt. Should we move? Aoyama's smile might as well have been chiseled out of stone, but even he looks unsure. Fuyuhiko just squints at the ceiling, ignoring the screaming students running past one particular kid, even going so far as to vault over their table. Ida would have thrown a fit. I thought this place was supposed to be armed to the teeth. How the fuck did something happen? Something besides us. Fuyuhiko doesn't say because, well, extenuating circumstances and all that. I guess we'll see, Hajime says indifferently. Having memorized is security by this point. Is built like a veritable fortress. Hajime is pretty sure there are actual fortresses with less security on them. More concerning though, Fuyuhiko, Komaeda says. Pleasant as a spring day, even as mayhem continues around them. Smile sweet and eyes unsettlingly blank. Can I borrow your tranquilizer gun, Maharu? Saionji tries for the third time. Maharu's gaze is fixed firmly out over the sea, eyes distant. It's an expression Saionji finds herself disliking more and more the more often she sees it. Limited not only to distant views, but also plates of food, nearby walls, and Maharu's camera lens. Saionji hates it. It makes Maharu feel 1,000 miles away even when Saionji is standing right next to her. Maharu, Saionji says more forcefully, only not contemplating. Pushing her off the boat for ignoring not noticing. Same difference her, because it's Maharu. Maharu blinks, jerking out of her thoughts to finally grace Saionji with the warm smile that Maharu always has prepared for her. Yes, Saionji? She asks kindly, green eyes once again focused. Saionji frowns judgmentally at her. You're worrying too much, she declares. Behind them, Terutoru makes a sound that could be badly muffled laughter, or him choking on his own spit, and finally dying. Saionji can only hope. Once again Maharu blinks, looking vaguely startled before her smile reappears. You are, Saionji reaffirms with all the authority of someone used to being listened to. They'll be fine, she says, cutting to the chase. They're like really, really, really annoying cockroaches. Saionji almost sounds annoyed herself, as if their ability to survive through near anything is more regretful than anything else. Maharu laughs, and it's a relief after days trapped on a ship full of pensive silences. I suppose you're right, she concedes. Hand over her mouth like that will put a lid on her amusement. Saionji sniffs imperiously, sticking her nose up. I'm always right, she declares, because at least one of them has to keep their spirits up, so they're not all moping lumps of wasted space. And somehow that job has fallen to Saionji. God help them all. Now help me drag Ryota out of his room, she orders. It's getting downright pathetic to even look in his general direction. Maharu laughs again, letting Saionji cling to her arm and drag her off into the depths of the ship to save Ryota from himself. Shit. A Shigaraki curses under his breath, searching frantically through the files. Where is it? Well, you don't look like a teacher. A light voice comments from behind him. A villain then. Shigaraki whips around. And standing in the doorway is Negido Komaeda, wearing a perfectly innocent and absolutely chilling smile. He quietly closes the door behind him with a soft click. Looking for something. Komaeda continues pleasantly, sounding perhaps mildly curious at most, and far too casual considering the circumstances. This guy pisses him off, Shigaraki decides then and there. Who the hell are you? He asks blankly, taking in his uniform and sweater vest. You? Student? Komaeda blinks innocently. Oh, me? I'm no one important, he says, dismissively with an airy smile that makes Shigaraki want to kill him. His fingers twitch at the increasingly tempting idea. Shigaraki grinds his teeth together, scratching his neck harshly. Rather, let's talk about something else, Komaeda says brightly, hands clasped earnestly in front of his chest. I'd like to make deal with you. An exchange of favors, you could say. And what's stopping me from just killing you right now and being done with it? Shigaraki threatens with a savage grin. Oh, I'm sorry, Komaeda says mournfully, with a light sigh, reaching into his uniform, which is how Shigaraki himself at the business end of a gun. I didn't mean to make you think you had a choice in this. My bad, Komaeda adds with his most unassuming smile despite the gun in his hand and the threat hanging in the air. Shigaraki wants to rip him into so many pieces that they won't be able to identify the body. Who the hell is this guy? Are you interested in hearing my proposal now? Komaeda asks lightly, eyes dark above his smile. Better hurry and decide before the heroes arrive. Hajim's leaning idly against a wall in the hallway when Komaeda finally comes back. The alarm had finally shut off some minutes ago. Reporters were the story everyone was going with. Just an odd happenstance and a case of faulty security. As if got what you wanted, Hajime asks wryly, pushing off the wall. Komaeda beams. Of course, he says lightly, adding weird shit. It all went according to plan, in a tone at odds with his kind smile. Hajime hums, unsurprised, as they start back down the hallway, walking close enough for their hands to brush. Komaeda has never needed a loaded gun to be dangerous, but having the illusion of one probably hadn't hurt, even if it was just an unloaded tranquilizer gun. You never call me by my first name, Komaeda observes, completely off topic and out nowhere, like he was just waiting for the opportunity to bring it up. What? Hajime says flatly, caught off guard. I mean, we are dating after all, Komaeda continues blithely, smiling still. Hajime can't help the blush crawling on his face as he glances away. It'd be weird, he protests, purposefully ignoring that he calls everyone else in their class by their first names. Komaeda glances at him speculative. Ah, he says, realization dawning. Is this your tsundere tendencies surfacing? Hajime sputters, the most uncomposed he's been since they arrived. What no? What are you even? Hajime cuts off abruptly as Komaeda lets out a huff of laughter, eyes glittering with humor and light teasing. Yeah, laugh it up, Hajime sighs, looking away grumpily while trying to curb the smile that wants to grow on his lips. Although, Negido, Hajime calls out, because Komaeda Negido never asks for anything. Not in the time Hajime has known him. But he'd asked for this in his own cryptic way. Hajime can give him that, at least. Negido blinks at him, his smile slowly growing. Yes, Hajime. Can I have your phone?